Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we've got something a little bit new because this year we are going to be doing summer scouting. I did not do this last year. I got started around August, and I'll be honest, guys, I was behind for a lot of the process early on because you're trying to learn prospects as the season's going on. So this season, what I've done is at every position, I'm going to take a list of around maybe 9 to 10 guys who are currently considered consensus top players. And we're going to go through the film. I'm going to give you my notes on them. I'm going to have rankings for before the season, where they're at now, if the draft was today. And then throughout the course of the season, I'll be able to update these, hopefully have better thoughts on these players as well. A lot has changed in the way I scout going into this year, because last year I found, and I mentioned this when we were talking about some of the film breakdowns from the 2024 class, that I ended up not really watching enough film on a lot of prospects. There were a lot of guys that I felt like I just did not take enough time on. You'd get 15, 20 minutes trying to go through all these players, and then you end up getting guys who really just get shafted in the process because I don't end up watching enough of them to understand really what is their game. And so this year, my goal is to watch 3 games from the previous season, which is what we've done so far, and then we'll watch hopefully 3 more games from the 2024 season, and that'll give a good idea of what was this player coming into the season, like what did they do, what were they good at, what did they improve at in 2024, and where should they go in 2025, because I think it's really important to consider how much these players are growing. I think it tells you a lot about the ceiling and the floor are far away from where they're at that point. I think it says a lot. So we're going to get into all that stuff, but for all these prospects, I've watched 3 games on them. I feel pretty comfortable talking about them. It has been, honestly, a couple weeks since I scouted them, but, pretty recent still, and we're trying to wrap up all the 2024 stuff because, well, I don't want to give you guys summer scouting before we've even finished our thoughts on our draft class. So with that all said, let's go ahead and let's jump into this. So we're going to start with Evan Stewart, who, out of my 9 players I scouted, I had ranked 9th, and I have him as a middle of the 3rd round pick. Now, just to explain some of these stats, you're going to see some of these numbers and such. So positions, you're going to see Z wide receiver, you're going to see S wide receiver, and you're going to see X wide receiver. A Z is going to be the guy who would line up, maybe not on the line of scrimmage. They're not going to be going through maybe as much physical contact. They're going to be a good route runner. They're going to be able to play outside, though, and they have to usually be pretty fast players. Your X wide receivers are your big vertical threats. So these are going to be taller players, stronger players, guys that are going to go down and win on the sideline. And then your slot receivers are players who are going to play inside, may not be as big, but they're going to be good route runners, usually going to be very athletic. That's what you're going to see from those players. And so, you could argue with Evan Stewart, maybe he's not a Z wide receiver, but that's where I see him right now, especially given his size. I think his height is good. I think his weight is a little too low for what you want outside, but I think he's going to put more on. You see that usually with college receivers and just with college players in general. They put on a lot of weight during their college careers to try to bulk up and get ready for the NFL. Now, other things to look at here, we have age, so pretty straightforward, and this is the age at the time of the draft. So he is currently 20 years old, but at the time of the draft, he'll be 21.6 years old. The height, the way this works, first number is going to be the feet. The second and third number are the inches, and the fourth number is 10ths of an inch. So you'll see that on some other ones, like 5110 is 5'11". Weight is straightforward. It's in pounds. You're going to see PFF grades as well on the bottom right. So these are just general grades. So it's taken like for offense for these players. And then I've got 6 different grades and then overall grade on the top right. So I'll explain what these all mean. So size is going to be based on physical measurements. So this is going to be height, weight, hand size, arm length, wingspan. Some of these things we, of course, don't know yet. We won't know for a very long time because we'll get that information at the combine. But it'll get updated once we have that. So this is basically what we're told and what we really think is true, because college teams lie quite a bit about the actual size of players. You also have athleticism. So this is going to be derived from testing numbers and film evaluation. So right now, this is purely film evaluation, what we see on the field. Route running is going to be from film evaluation. We're going to watch releases, separation, and then eventually once we get actual results from like the combine way down the road, we'll have like a 10-yard split getting factored in. So it'll tell us a lot about how explosive these players are and how they can separate on routes. Catching is the fourth one. This is going to be film evaluation once again. To learn this is going to be percentage of targets caught, and it's going to be the amount of drops that these players have. And then you have blocking. So film evaluation, PFF grades. Two things I'm going off for that. And physicality is one that I have pretty much for every position for the most part, except for like maybe quarterback and special teams players. But physicality is film evaluation. It's going to be watching them fight through press coverage at the wide receiver position. It's going to be yards after contact, and you're going to get broken tackles. So that's how we're doing these grades. And it is a scale from F all the way up to S. And so S is like basically elite. A is great, B would be good, C would be average, D would be like poor, or maybe below average, you could say. So hopefully that explains what all these letters mean and all that information. And if you guys have things you want to see on the screen, let me know. This is a different setup from what we've done in the past, but I wanted to give you guys more to look at and to be able to learn a little bit more about these players. So getting into thoughts on Evan Stewart. So you're going to see right off the bat, one of his highest grades is his athleticism. He is a very good athlete. He has great acceleration. He has a lot of speed on the field. And one of the things that's really nice about his game is that he's able to accelerate through very sharp cuts. He's a very good route runner. This is where I think he is able to separate himself from maybe lower in the pack of this wide receiver group, which you're going to learn this very quickly because even if this group is good, it's not as strong as it was in 2024. You're going to be disappointed with some position groups compared to this last draft class because this was a very strong class we just had in 2024. 2025 is a very defensive class. I don't think right now that's as good. Of course, I've only went through about 2.5 positions at this point. I'm on my third right now. So we'll see by the end of that how many like first round prospects I have going into the year, all that kind of information. Other things about Evan Stewart, like I said, route running is a plus heading into the season. I think he's going to get even better at that. And, you know, why he's 9th, right? It's because he's not a complete receiver right now. He's not fully there, but you do see the flashes on film of what he can be. And you see my pro comp at the bottom, and it's not that I think he's there yet, but this is more so maybe a player I think would be his ceiling. Because Jaden Reed is a much more physical wide receiver. I think he's a much stronger player. You see him win more contested catches. When I think about Evan Stewart and what he could be at his best, I think it's Jaden Reed. And the builds for both of these players are very similar. If you go watch highlights on them, they look like the same guy on the field. Maybe not in the physicality department, of course, but similar builds overall. Concerns on Evan Stewart, I do have a long list here. I do not think that right now he has the size to block, and I don't see him putting in fight as a blocker. That's a big concern. You know, like Jacksonville, because we're obviously a Jacksonville-centric YouTube channel, would probably not value a player like that unless something changes, of course, because they want players who are going to block their asses off, who are going to help in the run game. Teams value this quite a bit. And I don't think Evan Stewart is good in that regard right now at all. I also find that he needs to create more... he needs space to create after the catch. He's not going to fight well through tackles. This is going to the physicality part of his game, why I gave him a D there. He also drops a lot of passes. Way too many to like. I want to see that improve this year. Because if it doesn't, you're really not there as a player. And you're going to find in this list that a lot of the guys who have drop issues, who are not consistent catchers, are going to be lower on the board in general. I also found that his vision after the catch is mostly average. It's not super impressive. And a lot of the time, going back to talking about space and how he needs that, he really just wants to outrun everyone. He doesn't have much of a plan when he's engaging a defender, when he really doesn't have a choice. And you just will not see a lot of broken tackles. Now, like we said early on, wide receivers usually get stronger throughout their college careers. And Evan Stewart is going to have to do that this year, because if he doesn't, I don't think he's a complete prospect. And I have questions about him being a full-time player in that world. But he is going to a very good situation with Oregon, playing alongside Tez Johnson, who we'll talk about very soon in this video. And I believe they also got a quarterback transfer. I think Dylan Gabriel went up there. I'm only guessing that, though. I do not know for a fact, but that's old news. I just can't remember the name. But I know they've got a good situation up in Oregon. And then the final concern that I wrote was I felt like he lacks true burner speed. It's not all the way there. He's a fast player, but it's not like necessarily elite. And that's why his athleticism, well, it's a strength, it's not even an A on here, because I just don't think he is that level of an athlete. Now, to wrap up Evan Stewart here, I'm just going to read my summary, and I have these written for all these players, so this is how we'll wrap up prospects. I wrote that Stewart hasn't reached his full potential at the college level, but the flashes are visible on film. He already possesses a good route tree and creates separation with his uncanny ability to accelerate through sharp cuts. His overall athletic profile would point towards a productive receiver, but there are some troubling issues still plaguing his game. Stewart is undersized and doesn't have much of a physical element to his game, often lacking the size to fight for yards and to be an effective blocker. His effort is also questionable at times, being often on and off. The biggest concern I have is his hands, given the high drop rate and how brutal some of them are on film. Stewart isn't a special player yet, but he'll have the chance to take a major step forward and join the top group of receivers. And then the games I watched, just so you guys have this information: Miami, Florida, Tennessee, and Auburn from the 2023 season. So with that said, let's go to the next prospect. I've got a fun one here. This is Deion Burks. He's transferring from Purdue to Oklahoma. Try to get shots of these players on their new teams when I could. Deion Burks reminds me a little bit of Malachi Corley, but maybe a more developed route runner at this point. And I also don't know. Malachi Corley is obviously a crazy physical player. That's the thing that stood out so much about him. He plays like a running back. I don't know if Burks is the exact same, but he is a very physical wide receiver, and I gave him an elite score in that regard. That's what really stands out about him as a player. I currently have him as a Z wide receiver. He'll probably move around the formation, something that those players will also do. I think he can play inside the slot, of course, as well. The question will be, is he going to be a slot or is he going to play outside? I think right now that he can play outside. He is going to be 22 entering the draft, so still young, not the youngest though out of this class. And while he's 195 pounds here, and we'll obviously get real measurements later, he plays like he's a 215-pound running back, and he looks like it on film when you're watching the Purdue tape, which is all we got right now at this point. But Deion Burks, for that size and for the weight it feels like he plays at, he has elite acceleration and twitch. This is why he gets an A for his athletic score from me. This allows him to create separation. He varies his pace throughout routes as well, shows some really good route running skills in that regard, and a lot to work with in what really separates the comp, which these are very loose comps for the most part. Some of them are a lot closer, but you get elements that remind you of a player. You get size, maybe sometimes you get maybe the physicality or the way someone runs their routes or whatever it may be. And Deion Burks does remind me a little bit of that very recent prospect in Malachi Corley. Now, other things about Burks that are positives: he's a good blocker when he's getting engaged, plays with a high motor. He is a high effort player. You love to see that. That's something you're going to need at the position. And then the final thing I wrote, kind of talking about the Corley comp here, he bounces off tacklers like a running back. He has great contact balance. The way you see him play after the catch, it feels like he's a running back downfield, and he's broken past the first and second level. He's It's really impressive stuff, and you'll very quickly, I mean, not everyone will, but I felt like very quickly watching him that he was a fun prospect, and he was someone I was going to easily be able to root for in this class, and someone who could be really good at the NFL level. Now, of course, being 8th on the list, there are concerns. He obviously does not have ideal length. He is sub 6 foot, which gives the questions of, is he going to play outside? But obviously the physicality kind of makes me feel like he can, and gives me some hope there. And then while he's really good at changing directions, you don't see the great start and stop ability to go along with that, which, you know, is sort of attributed to his mass, which I really don't know if he was playing at 195 pounds last year. Maybe he got smaller this year. And if he did, that really changes the evaluation, and we'll have to see what happens at Oklahoma when the college football season starts. But, you know, Deion Burks, it's kind of a weird situation because you usually think these things go hand in hand with changing directions and being able to start and stop, but they really don't for him. And I feel like the film kind of explains that. Now, last two things here. The amount of targets that he got in 2023 and the amount he brought in was really concerning, because his completion percentage ended up being less than 50%. And he clearly has a drop issue on film. So once again, going to the same theme, those kinds of players, well, they have a lot of potential. You don't make an impact if you can't catch the ball. And so that is a major concern for me. He got a D- there, which really brings down this grade. I think if he was able to catch at a high level, Burks is probably a mid to early second rounder heading into this season. And he will be for some people. For people who feel very comfortable saying that he's going to be able to figure that out. And I think he can. But we're going to have to see it for ourselves. Now, PFF grades, compared to some of these other players, a bit lower. But I found this year, like watching prospects, that it does not always line up with PFF. There are guys that will have really high grades, and it is not always an accurate representation of how they play. For example, Javon Foster was one of those guys because the PFF grading for him was consistently around, 85. And so you'd think, well, he should be like a really good left tackle prospect in the draft, but he still goes 4th round. And you watch the film, and he's got some pretty big concerns in pass protection. Good run defender, good run blocker, but there are concerns there. And so sometimes PFF is not always accurate. I think it's a good tool to use, but you always got to watch film too. And with Burks, he's one of those players that I think that applies to, where PFF is saying, yeah, he's all right. He's a little bit better than average, because 60 is average for them. I think he's a little bit better than that, but you just got to work on the catching. And I think that would really elevate his game. Now, to get into his summary, what I wrote here, I said Burks has some incredible tools at his disposal, such as his elite acceleration and twitch. His combination of adequate releases and athleticism allows him to create good separation on routes. Burks is a high motor receiver and turns into a power back after the catch. What truly stops me from considering Burks as an early day 2 pick are his hands, since he wasn't able to bring in half his targets during his final season with Purdue. This, combined with his below average size, makes it difficult to see him finding success in close quarters. Burks is an exciting prospect. It reminds me a bit of the Yak King, which is Malachi Corley, although his route tree and ball skills are in different stages of development. And then for the games that I reviewed, all from 2023, is Ohio State, Fresno State, and Michigan. So let's move on. We're going to talk about another fun player. I was going to say a fun player, but we've already had one in Deion Burks. This is Tez Johnson, the other Oregon receiver. So we've already gone through 2 of them. So Tez Johnson, he is not your typical wide receiver, and you're going to see that immediately when you look at his weight and his size too. He is going to be almost 23 heading into the draft. He is a pure slot receiver. You'll see him come outside a little bit, but not really ideal for him. He's 5'10" and 160 pounds. This is 5 pounds lighter than what Xavier Worthy was. And if Xavier Worthy wasn't 5 pounds lighter, well, he's probably a possibly early first round pick in that draft class. But Tez Johnson, for what he is as a player, he is really damn good at it. And he reminds me a ton of Tank Dell when I watch him. He's as elusive as it gets. He's always trying to create after the catch. He does a really good job making people miss, so doesn't have to do it with physicality, but he will make it happen when he has any space to work with. He does a lot of damage in open space. And then you find that his contact balance is, we're talking about similar to Deion Burks here. It's great. It's great stuff. At the same time, like, I'm not saying he looks like a running back after the catch. That's the big difference there, but he is really good at staying on his feet, even when he gets hit by a defender, as long as it's not head on, because he's obviously going to be most of the time, 30, 40 pounds lighter than the guys he's going up against if it's not a linebacker, and that's best case scenario. But Johnson does a really good job creating after the catch and doing what he can with the gifts that he has and being a very unique type of wide receiver. And out of all these players, I think this is the first one that I could possibly imagine Jacksonville considering this year. Because I think with Stewart, I don't think he's a huge need for Jacksonville. I think that Burks is kind of the same thing there. Johnson, well, we don't need starters. He might fall because of the size. And I think as even a fourth guy, you can get him out onto the field quite a bit. When people are taking snaps off, move people around the formation, and he could be a really nice impact player and someone who could possibly, be explosive and create those big plays Jacksonville's looking for. So out of this list, probably the first guy I'm looking at very close. But obviously you get some concerns here. You get a lot of bad grades on the top right because of this, with his size. He's massively undersized. The physicality, well, I didn't give him an F because I feel like he at least tries to fight. There's a little bit of something there. The physicality is not what you want, and I have no expectations of that becoming what I want because you'd have to be a completely different player. That gets rid of all the things that he wins at. And so it just doesn't make sense to expect him to become a physical wide receiver. I found as well, the only way he's going to break tackles is making people miss. Kind of implied that earlier. I do not see him surviving against press coverage, which is why I cannot see him as a Z on an offense. I don't think you can put him outside against cornerbacks out there. I think you want him inside where, well, maybe a Z receiver won't get pressed as much as an X. If you're going inside, generally defenses are putting their smaller cornerbacks on the inside in the nickel. That's who I want Tez Johnson to be going up against. Now, other things here. As far as his incompletions, the amount of incompletions he had, almost half of them ended up being drops. So you have some concerns with his hands. I don't think they're massive. I don't think it's the end of the world. I have him just below average. But I do think he has to improve in that regard. Because if he can, well, now we're talking about a really good offensive weapon that you're really not concerned about a whole lot as long as you're using him the way that God intended him to be used. Now, last thing I'll mention here, if you're going to use him, you want to use him on the move a lot. You want to keep cornerbacks away. He's going to be fast. He's going to be able to separate doing that. He's going to beat people running across the formation. I don't want to see him not being used on the move a lot. He's an offensive weapon. You got to get creative with him. You got to find ways to get him space. If you can do that, Tez Johnson could be an impact player for an NFL team. So really exciting stuff. And I think to kind of back up what I've been saying about him being really good at what he does, take a look at the PFF grades. 2 years in a row. Playing with Bo Nix, playing with his brother. I think Tez is his adopted brother, which is cool stuff there. Great PFF grades. I mean, these are elite grades. He is great at what he does. And so I'd love to see him go to a situation next year where he's doing the same stuff that he's been doing now, getting on the move, getting open in space, and beating defenses that way, and being a nightmare for those defenses to play against. And then hopefully he just becomes a better catcher. Now, for my summary on him, I wrote that Johnson is a unique prospect that's hard to find a comp for. He's a clearly effective and productive receiver, but his size is almost unrivaled for how small he is. My mind immediately goes to Xavier Worthy, but Johnson is still smaller, while an even more elusive playmaker. He can do lots of damage when he's given open space, and teams will have to be ready when he's doing just that. Now, his role will be very specific because he doesn't have the size or the physicality to fight through press coverage, and his hands aren't always reliable. Depending on where he lands, Johnson could be anything from a bust to a unicorn athlete who produces at a high level. And I would be willing to say he's probably going to be closer to the latter. I don't know if he's going to be an elite wide receiver one. I don't think that's going to be the case. I just don't think you see those players be that. I think you see them play good and have an impact, but I won't put them in that category. And so if a team uses him well, I think he's going to be really good in the NFL. And then for the film review on Tez Johnson, it was all 2023 film for him of Colorado, Oregon State, and Washington. So we'll move on to some different types of wide receivers here. We're getting into some bigger guys, some of the outside players. Again, our first X receivers we're talking about. And the first one is Tory Horton. If you asked me last season, last college football season that was, what I thought of Tory Horton, I would say this guy sucks, and all he does is he runs 3 routes on the field. Actually, correct that. Not 3, it's probably 2. That is not how I feel about him now, because I have to look at him at a very different way. Horton is a fantastic developmental prospect at the position, but the way he's used by Colorado State is frustrating, because they basically tell him, okay, you're going to run a slant this play. And then he's like, all right, you're going to have me do something different now? And they're like, no, you're going to run another slant. He just constantly is running across the middle every single play. That's all they ask him to do. It is very frustrating because you see the ability there to be a very good wide receiver. But he just is not developing into that because they will not use him in any different of a role. They just want him to run across the middle all the time. So, very frustrating film watch for that reason. It's not really his fault. That's why he's not last on this list and why I feel very different about him now. But he's an X wide receiver. He's big, 6'2", 190. He's going to be roughly 22 years old. I put a question mark by it because I could not get the birthday. There are some players each year you could get to draft day and you don't even know how old these guys are. It's very frustrating, but I tried to do my research, couldn't find it. That'll probably happen for a lot of players early in the process. But talking about Horton's game, he has very good length. He has a very large catch radius, so really good physical tools to work with. I gave him a B+ in the size category. He has strong hands as well. Brings down difficult catches, very good contested catch guy, and that's why he gets an A for his catching ability. He has some suddenness, surprisingly, for being a 6'2", 190 receiver. Helps him evade tackles a bit, and while his speed isn't necessarily elite, I think it's pretty good. I think it's above average for sure. I also found on film that he can be a bit of a return man. So if you're looking for someone to put into that role, Tory Horton could be your guy. And obviously, like Jacksonville, you're not really looking at that, but I think you're kind of looking at different things with Horton's game if you're considering taking him. And then the final thing I wrote for a positive here is that he's a smart football player. He knows how to get open and has good vision after the catch. And you do find that a lot. He was very productive for having a route tree of basically 2 different routes that he would run. And so I hope that he improves off that. I don't expect Colorado State to have him do that this year. So he's probably going to enter the draft as mostly a developmental prospect for those reasons, which is really unfortunate because I think if they really unleashed him and had him doing different things, he's a better prospect coming into this. And so you have to take a bet on him because, well, I don't think Colorado State's gonna get out of him what's there. Now, getting into concerns, reiterating on the route running. It's screens, curls, and slants. So maybe it is 3 different types of routes, but it's just all that kind of stuff over and over and over. There's very little creativity with the way that they use Tory Horton. He doesn't have much power as well to break tackles. He's 190, so he's a smaller X receiver than what you're used to. He could bulk up a little bit, but he's also got that advantage in athleticism, so kind of combines well, I would say. And then you'll tell on film, he's kind of high-hipped. It's not really a guy who's going to make super sharp cuts, so the route running ability might be capped a little bit because of that, but I still think that he generally has a lot of potential in that regard if a team wants to go and develop him. And, with how bad it is right now, with how few routes they're having him run, and this is my last concern right here, I could see a scenario where he's not able to develop this year, and an NFL team has to have him as a backup developing for his first rookie season in the NFL. I think that's possibly a scenario for Horton, unfortunately. So for me, I ended up having Van Jefferson as a comp, just watching the film, especially from like college for Van Jefferson. Felt very similar, especially based around size. That's really where I got that comp from. It's kind of a loose one though. And then going into the summary here, kind of to wrap up Tory Horton, I said that Horton would be an excellent developmental prospect for a team that needs a long-term X wide receiver. He already has some traits the scouts will covet, such as his length, catching ability, and overall football intelligence. Despite running a limited route tree, he's been a game-breaking receiver that knows how to get open and keep an offense moving. Horton might have a tough transition to the NFL if teams want him to start immediately, but he could pan out relatively quick. He must expand his route tree and add a few pounds to reach his potential, and if he does that, he could be a productive all-around threat and a quarterback's best friend. And so he's first out of these prospects to get a higher round grade, so still technically third round, but I have him as an early third round prospect. With the way my overalls work here, A is going to be first round, B is going to be second, C is third, D is going to be day 3. And then if you have an S tier guy, that's going to be like top of the first round blue chip prospects. So I have Horton as an early third rounder. And the film I reviewed for him was all 2023. It's Boise State, Colorado, and Utah State. So now we're going to move forward. We're going to talk about another X wide receiver here. And that's Tre Harris. I think the first thing that I would say about Tre Harris and what comes to mind when I hear his name is a very hard worker, a guy that's going to put a lot of effort in on the field. He comes in with really good size. He's an X wide receiver. You're going to have that, of course. 6'2", 205, so similar stuff to Horton, but he's got more weight on him. He is above 200 pounds. He is also an older prospect. He's going to come in at 23 years old. So he has been playing quite a bit in college. Now, for my notes on him, I had Romeo Doubs as my comp. Just watching how Doubs has played at Green Bay, I feel like they're kind of similar guys. It's another loose one because I have not watched a ton of Doubs. Not someone that I sit down every Sunday to see on TV. But he's a pretty successful receiver in the NFL. I think he's outproven what he was supposed to be, and the way they play their games feel very similar. So getting into the notes on Tre Harris, he has ideal size for an X wide receiver. He fights well through press coverage, so you're going to get those high physicality grades. You're going to get that with blocking even. The effort shows even on plays where he's not getting the ball. When the ball's not even on his side of the field, he is still trying. And that A+ in blocking, he earns that. He is an excellent blocker, and you can tell when you watch him on film that he takes pride in that part of his game. For being a 6'2", 205-pound wide receiver, he's pretty athletic. It's not a massive advantage, right? But I think he's a little above average, and that's impressive given his size. And then one thing I saw watching film, and this was one of my games I saw, I believe, was against LSU in the 2023 season. You could tell a difference between Tre Harris early in the game and at the end when the game was on the line. He stepped up big for his team on the last drive, led him down the field as a receiver, ended up winning against LSU, which is obviously a very good football team. Not a perfect one last year, but that's a good football team. So impressive stuff from Tre Harris, and he'll make you like him pretty dang quick with how hard he's always trying. Now, concerns, while the athleticism is slightly above average, he lacks that true burner speed. So you're throwing to him downfield, he's either got blown coverage or he's going to be in a contested catch situation. His route running, he's also not going to create a ton of separation from that. It's mostly average, I would say, and if not below average. He also, as a contested catch receiver, leaves a little bit to be desired. There's some really nice plays on film, but when you look at his percentage of completions on contested catches, it leaves something to be desired. And so that's going to be something that I have to watch very close this year when we come back to Tre Harris, hopefully, in January, February, around that time. He might be a Senior Bowl guy, so I might get to actually go see him out there, which would be fun. Other things on Tre Harris, I got two more concerns with him. Once again, doesn't create much separation on routes. You're not going to get a lot there from him. And then there were some games in 2023 where he got locked down. There's a few too many times for me to like. So I'm not seeing him as the lead target for an NFL team, but I see him as a really nice complementary piece, someone who's going to do their job, and someone that could have some pretty good games here and there. But that is not the guy that I think of throwing the ball to every single play and getting heavily involved in the offense. I think he is a part of an offense. I think he's a good one. So that's kind of where I see him. And then to get into the summary for him, just to read my notes here, I said that Harris is one of my most appreciated prospects in this class because of the discipline he plays with. He's a tough receiver with a high motor that takes pride in whatever role he's given. While he's not a great separator, Harris is a good athlete for his build and can be surprisingly elusive after the catch in open space. However, I have some concerns with Harris as he lacks the ideal speed and suddenness to create adequate separation. While most X wide receivers can survive with this, Harris hasn't shown the dominant contested catch skills I was looking for. This caused him to be a non-factor in the passing game more than a few times in 2023, so he'll have to prove that he can fix this to be a reliable asset in an NFL offense. And the three games I watched, all from 2023, you have Georgia, LSU, and Arkansas. So Tre Harris is going to be our last third-round prospect here. So we have 5 of them to start this off, which would tell you that since we have 9 prospects here, 4 of them are going to be first or second round guys. So compared to this last year, going into the season, and of course my grades might be lower than a lot of consensus is on some of these guys, doesn't mean I hate them anymore or anything like that. I don't think it's as strong of a class, and I don't think it's even really that close. I just don't think you even have one prospect who matches what the big 3 did from this last year. And I said in my last video that Brian Thomas Jr. as a player, I think he would be wide receiver 1 this year. So not as strong at the top, but there are some fun players in the top 2 rounds, some really likable guys and people I think you can put bets on and feel pretty comfortable with heading into the 2024 college football season. So my 4th guy, got Isaiah Bond, who reminded me a lot of Rondale Moore. It went off of size quite a bit for this one. Very similar builds. You look at pictures of these guys, look very similar, and they kind of run the same way. Kind of have the same assets on the field. Isaiah Bond, he's a slot receiver. He is a still very young player. He's 20 years old right now, just turned 20. Would have been a couple months ago at this point. So he's fresh. At 5'11", I question that a little bit. I don't know if he's 5'11". I think it's maybe more like 5'10". He's one of those players that I think they're kind of bull crapping numbers on a bit. And then 182 pounds is probably pretty close to what he is. Now, getting into the notes for Isaiah Bond, he has game-breaking speed and acceleration. Truly game-breaking. Which is why he gets that elite grade for his athleticism. He also shows a lot of fight when he's blocking defenders. And we'll talk a little bit more about his blocking here in a second when we get to concerns, because that is a concern Just something that I noticed watching the film. Another good thing about him, great change of direction ability. This kind of goes along with the athleticism, but he's fast. He's going to have those quick cuts, and he's going to be able to get consistently open doing that in football. Now, you're going to find separation, like I said, and that separation, even right off the snap, is going to make it very hard for cornerbacks to be able to press him. He is an extremely elusive player. And so his speed is so good, and you see this with these smaller receivers, which Bond is a little bit bigger than some of those guys. Not your prototypical super small receiver, which that is the difference between him and Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore, I think, is like 5'7", so a little bit different there. But still, I think it's a relatively good loose comp there. But Bond, like, it's hard to press him because you have to get your hands on him, and to get your hands on him, you got to be close enough. And I just didn't see cornerbacks do that often enough to really be able to take advantage of that weakness in Bond's game. It just doesn't show up as much as you think. And then, well, you'd look at him and say, yeah, he's only a slot receiver, and that is my projection right now. He's going to have to prove it this year. I do find that he has plenty of experience playing outside too. I think he's going to have the opportunity in 2024 to prove that he is a Z wide receiver, and he's going to get more snaps all around, maybe be able to offer more to an offense, get on the field quicker as well. Now, concerns for Bond, he is a small receiver, and like I said, I think it's a little bit less than that listed size. And I'll go for all these guys. I just think it applies maybe a little bit more to Bond. And then going back to the blocking, he was substituted out on run plays quite a bit. And it's sort of a weird thing for me because that tells me they don't trust him as a blocker, right? And he's a small guy. Like, I get why they don't trust him. But at the same time, when I saw him blocking, the effort's there. He's not always winning, but I think he's good enough to stay on the field. And so I have his blocking as a pretty low grade because of that, but it might be better than where it is. But that is a concern, right? Because if you can't be out on the field all the time, limits your ability to be a full-time receiver. And that also tells defenses what you're doing. Because if you pull Bond off the field, and you have him on your offense, and you're consistently doing that when you're running the ball, all of a sudden teams are going to pick up on that, and your offense is going to be more predictable than it's been before. So a little bit of a concern for me. And going back to that full-time player thing, he has not been a full-time player yet in his career. He's more of an offensive weapon for teams that have had him. And given he's a very good offensive weapon, which is why he's getting a second-round grade, even if a late second-round grade here. And then going back to talking about press coverage, if defenders are able to get their hands on him, you will find that he gets shoved off his route. He will get displaced really bad. And so you kind of worry in those first 5 yards where you're getting contact, if he's not able to use his athleticism to, keep far enough away and not be impacted on the route, that Bond is going to potentially struggle, and he's going to be losing in that physical press coverage. Final thing on him, this is a pretty obvious one, quite frankly. Like, he is not built for contested catch situations. So you're not going to be looking at him as that kind of receiver. Not a huge deal, though. That's not what you're trying to get if you're drafting Isaiah Bond. You're looking for a very different type of wide receiver. Now, getting into my summary on him, I said that Bond shows everything that you'd like for in a small and speedy receiver. He possesses elite speed and athleticism that raise the floor in an already respectable route tree. What's perhaps most exciting is that his explosiveness is such an advantage that can almost eliminate press coverage at times, since defenders can't get their hands on him. Very similar to like what we talked about with Tez Johnson. Bond could be a star at the next level, but he still needs to prove he can stick on the field in a full workload and be a functional enough blocker. This, coupled with his size concerns, limits him to being an offensive weapon, but I think he could be a bit more. And then once again, my pro comp was Rondale Moore, and the film that I reviewed, all from 2023, it was Georgia, Arkansas, and Middle Tennessee. So now we're going to get into the big three of this group. Not the same caliber, but I do think there's a bit of a difference. between these three guys and the rest of the class at this point. The first one I'm going to talk about, my third overall guy, and by now you can tell we're going from worst to first in this ranking. And they're all pretty good athletes and pretty good players, but there's some disparity here. The first guy of this group and the third overall prospect at receiver heading into the season for me might be the most complete out of these guys, but it's not really a player that I love the build of as much. I'm not a sucker for 6'5" receivers, but that's what Tetairoa McMillan is. He is a big wide receiver. And given that, I thought, oh, he's probably not going to be big on my board because he looks like Johnny Wilson on the field. He's not like Johnny Wilson. He's a really good receiver, and I learned my lesson pretty dang quick. He is surprisingly fluid for his size. Just really exciting stuff when you watch him. And if I had to say right now, like, who would I trust the most out of this entire wide receiver group? Like, if I want to make sure I absolutely hit on the pick and do not miss, Tetairoa McMillan is how I do that. That's the one player I would choose here. Now, obviously, given he's 6'5", he's an ex-wide receiver. He's listed at 205 pounds. He probably is 205, but it really felt like on film, he just doesn't look that big. Like, my comp is Michael Pittman Jr., but there is a difference between those two players because Pittman plays around like 220, 225. McMillan is at least 20 pounds lighter, but he's also a more fluid athlete and maybe a little bit faster of a player. So you kind of got to pick and choose what you like more and what you like less there. But still, given their size and the way they play the game, they remind me of each other quite a bit. But Tetairoa McMillan, getting into the positives with him, if you're looking for length, you found it. He's got all the length you could ask for, and he will have a major advantage in every contested catch situation he's in. And the other thing with that, he's already a monster enough because of how big he is and how big his frame is, but he has ridiculously strong hands, probably the best hands in this entire class. Drop rate has been basically non-existent for him. It's basically a 0. There's really good stuff there. That's an incredible combination, and in hindsight, you'd almost put him as a first rounder here. But he's a different type of receiver. He's not your prototypical kind of guy. He's got good acceleration and overall speed to his game. And at the catch point, he does a hell of a job adjusting to the catch. Everything you're looking for down the field, he has it. That's really exciting stuff if you're looking for a deep threat wide receiver. He's also a very willing blocker. He stays involved in the play, not someone who's going to give up on plays. He's a good route runner as well. Very fluid movement, like we mentioned. He knows how to use leverage to create a throwing window. He's a very smart football player. Really good stuff from an Arizona wide receiver. We're not going to be talking about a lot of guys from Arizona, but this is going to be one of them. Talking about receiver position, of course, because we actually will have, I believe, Tetairoa Davis in the cornerback group. So we'll have some other prospects. We had Jordan Morgan last year. They have their guys, but usually we're not going after wide receivers this early too often. Last year you had Jacob Cowing, who was a good prospect, but not a fringe first, and probably, McMillan will be a first by the end of this. Getting into concerns with McMillan's game, I don't think, like I said, that he's 205 pounds, maybe a little bit lighter. I just question that a bit. He also rounds off a lot of his cuts, which it's something to be expected, right? Like, he is a big wide receiver. You get guys this big, you are not going to be that athletic. You're not going to be able to make those sharp cuts. And so that kind of limits his route running ability. And so that is a little bit of a concern, but not really the main thing you're looking for in this type of wide receiver. And given his lighter frame, because he looks very skinny on the field, cornerbacks have a lot of surface area to press him, and he lacks the strength sometimes to always fight through it. He is not as good against press coverage as what you want an X-wide receiver to be. And then, going back to that physicality, he's not much of a physical threat. He doesn't break tackles. He's not gonna do that with strength. He might do it juking out a guy, but he's not like Brian Thomas Jr., but it's kind of the same thing in the regard to him being an X wide receiver that is more athletic than usual for being an X wide receiver. Not the same build, right? Very different players, but kind of similar in that regard, that they're not as physical as you think an X wide receiver is going to be, but they're a lot more athletic than you think. Thomas being probably much more of an athlete than McMillan, but McMillan's better in some other areas too, to be fair. So wrapping up McMillan here, my summary on him, I wrote that McMillan profiles as a prototypical X wide receiver of this class with incredible length and downfield ball skills. Despite his size, McMillan is a relatively fast player with good acceleration that can catch defenders off guard. McMillan is also an intelligent prospect, having a good understanding of route running and gaining leverage against cornerbacks. While he has plenty of exciting traits, McMillan also comes with a leaner frame than expected, and while he's relatively fluid, he lacks the ability to make sharp cuts. This can make it difficult to separate from press coverage, although his ball skills pick up the slack. While he's a willing run blocker and a pass blocker, I wouldn't consider it to be a positive to his overall game. And just to fix that, run blocker, not pass blocker. He's running routes on those plays. But McMillan should continue to produce at Arizona and warrant an early draft selection, but he may have limitations that limit how high his stock can go. So I gave him an early second round grade. I do think he makes his way into the first right now. I have a hard time seeing him not back up his production. I think he's a really good receiver. He's on a good team, and he's going to do really well this year. And then the film reviewed for McMillan, all from 2023. You have Oklahoma, Washington, and Utah. So now we get into the final two guys. And there's obviously an order here, but they both have one big concern heading into this year, and they're basically tied for me at this point. Very close. I lean towards one because I've been a fan of his for quite a while. You all know who he is if you follow me on Twitter and have listened to anything regarding this next draft class. But the first of these two, and the one I have ranked second, is Luther Burden III. Another guy who gets a comp to Deebo Samuel, but I swear, guys, he is the one who is the closest to Deebo Samuel of everyone. I'm sorry. If I could have done anyone else other than Deebo Samuel, I would have, but this legit feels like what he should be comped to. But he's a slot wide receiver, 5'11", 208. He is a monster after the catch. That's what you're going to see with him, and he has the same questions of route running, right? So all the generic, big stuff with Luther Burden, it's like the whole Deebo Samuel discussion there. But getting into my positives, he's very athletic. He's got great speed, great burst, great fluidity. And he also gets very creative after the catch. He maximizes plays consistently. I love to see that from receivers, where you just see him fight for those extra yards at the end. One of the things I loved about Brian Thomas Jr., going back to him for a moment, was how you'd see him do that. He would try to maximize plays. So I do like that stuff, and you saw that from both LSU receivers, to be fair, neighbors as well. Other things on Luther Burden, though, getting back to the topic at hand, well, he's got a big question about route running. It's respectable at this point, and I did give him a B-. I was probably a little more lenient than I should have been, but I think it's maybe, not, I don't think it's terrible, right? I think he's a little above average, but that's clearly the area of his game where he has to improve, along with blocking, as you'll see with the D- grade. And then strength and speed combination is one of the best you're going to get in this class, one of the best you're going to see in a prospect. Makes him a nightmare when he has the ball, because he almost plays like a running back. And then the final positive I had on him is that he does have that top speed to burn the defense and to create explosive plays, and he does excel as well in jet sweeps. So you might see him as more of a Z for that reason, someone you're going to move around the formation, and that's maybe more so what he's used as with Missouri right now. It'll just be a question of where a team prefers him in the NFL, and I could really see both of those being possibilities. Now, concerns with them, there is a list here of things to go through. He's been confined to the slot, quite a bit still due to that size. He's 5'11", but he does have the physicality from that 208 pounds and the way he plays the game to, I think, play outside. But there is the question there. He also doesn't have the length to win in contested catch situations on the perimeter, which is what stops you from obviously putting him as an X receiver. He also was not a positive impact as a blocker, and I felt like he took off plays. Not good. Like, that's not something I want to see, and it's a big concern, maybe not the biggest, but I do want to see him improve as a blocker. He has to try in that regard, and when you get into the effort stuff and you have to start questioning that gets really sketchy, and you can see some players fall because of it. I don't think Luther Burden is necessarily in that territory, but if that is something I see again this year and that's a prominent issue, that could be a problem. You know, you saw A.D. Mitchell fall last year. That might be part of the reason, quite frankly. I know there were some other things mentioned, but there were effort issues with him. That was one of the big things mentioned before the draft. He was supposed to go late first. He did not. So I want to see that improve with Burden. It's not at that same level, but I want to see the effort from him. He also needs to develop more releases for his routes. This is probably the most lacking thing about his route running ability. Just not a lot of releases from him. And then effort feels, going back to that for a moment, it just feels drastically different based on whether he's a part of the play or not a part of the play. You see a different wide receiver there. So he has to improve in that regard. And then final concern here, he relies more on speed than decisive cuts to separate on routes. I think with how good of an athlete he is, he needs to improve his route running drastically because there's so much potential there. And that's why people are so excited about him and why he's pretty much the consensus wide receiver one. Because if he improves as a route runner, if he has the releases, if he has the sharp cuts, he's a great player. He is a logical breakout candidate for this year because of all those reasons. Because he's not far away, and this is stuff he should be able to figure out at the next level. And before then, during his final season at college, we would at least assume this is his final season. And then for notes on him, I said that Burden's a breakout candidate for the 2024 college football season. He possesses some of the best film you'll find after the catch, as he has top-notch speed, strength, creativity, and this all creates consistently big plays. Missouri focused on getting Burden space when throwing to him, as these situations often led to his best plays, but that speaks to the development he still needs before the catch. While Burden is a solid route runner, he lacks a proper array of releases and doesn't make the sharp cuts that could create more separation. He's also a shorter receiver, so he'll likely be confined to playing inside due to the lack of length, putting him at a disadvantage on the perimeter. My last criticism of Burden is that he isn't the positive impact he should be in blocking for his size, often failing to put in enough effort or create open lanes. If Burden can take another step forward this season, I could see him being the best slot receiver in the class. And then for his grade, I gave him a late first round grade as of now. And for the film reviewed, all 2023 film, I watched Kansas State, South Carolina, and Georgia. So this leaves one logical receiver left, and definitely not a consensus number one receiver by the community or the top receiver of this class. But for me, he is. It's some really exciting film, and I think you can justify why things weren't as good last year for him. And that's Emeka Egbuka. This is probably my favorite comp that I've ever made for a player. He reminds me so much of Christian Kirk. You just feel like the same guy on the field. And for Jaguars fans, I will say that if somehow, and I pray to God it doesn't happen, but if for some reason Christian Kirk does not recover from this injury or isn't the same guy, or there is a very good reason that emerges that you cannot have him on the team next year, this is a very high target in the draft to replace him. Now, I do not think that will be the case. I don't want that to be the case, and hence it's kind of a weird situation because I love what Egbuka brings to the field, but I don't want my team to get him, right? Because I think he's a slot receiver, and maybe that changes this year. Maybe he proves something. That's probably what he is, though, in this class. So one of my favorite comps probably the two closest players I've ever had when finding a comp. So getting into some information on him, like I said, I had him as a slot receiver. Um, he is going to be 22 and a half years old. He came back for his fourth year. Obviously, he had to do that because this last season did not go that well. And Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to figure it out. Did not have as good of a year, though. But Egbuka just wasn't really the same guy. And you could see on film why, because when you watch 2023 film for him, the quarterbacks just suck. Like, I mean, I don't want to... I probably shouldn't say it that way, right? But they just weren't able to get him the ball. It's like every freaking target was off. Like, it was like watching, like, Xavier Legette on day one of the Senior Bowl every single game. That's what it was like watching Emeka Egbuka's film. And you're just like, can it end? Can they just stop missing him on every play? But with that growing, that also hurts the player, and the player doesn't play as well. And so that's the big concern and why he's not a number one wide receiver for this class right now. But I do think that he can get back to that this year. I think he has a better situation. I think he has Will Howard as his quarterback, and that should be good enough to be a good wide receiver. And he is the top dog in that offense finally. So he should be in for a good season. We'll see how it goes. But getting into my notes on him, he has a lot of experience moving around the formation, so he can play outside, but he's probably one of those guys that you're going to want him mainly in the slot. And then he's a strong, compact receiver, and he plays like a running back after the catch. We got quite a few guys who've said that about, but it really does apply to Egbuka. He's a strong player after the catch. He's also rumored to have 4.3 speed. So really good stuff. Really good combination. And, with that, I do question maybe the acceleration a little bit, but he is a fast player on the field. And then the final positive I wrote with him, he is a very nuanced route runner. He's someone who's going to create separation when he's on his game. If you want to see what the upside is for Emeka Egbuka, go watch him in 2022 with CJ Stroud and with that team. He is a wildly different player than what he was maybe in 2023. And if you're going off of what he was before, he's probably wide receiver one in this class. But it's the question of, do you think he's going to get it back or not? Now, getting into concerns, I've already mentioned this a couple times, but the production obviously took a massive hit in 2023. He also got hurt a little bit during that season. This is mostly due to quarterback play, though. And that's going to be the big change, hopefully, this year for him. And a lot of this depends on how good Will Howard is, because if they have the same problems, well, I don't know if Egbuka is going to be a first-round pick then. I think he's probably a middle-of-the-second kind of guy. And, hey, I'll be honest, if he is, that's great for football teams that pick him. Like, whoever gets him, that's a steal. So, that could be very unfortunate for him, but maybe you look at it that way. Other concerns, well, he's pretty athletic. His stocky build kind of limits some of his ability to be an elite route runner. So I do not have him as like a great route runner. I have him as a good one, a very good one, but not really up to great. And then the final thing with him, and this has been a big question for a while, is that we don't know right now if he can be a Z wide receiver in the NFL. That's a big question that has to be answered this year. And they should be able to answer it because he's the top guy on the offense. He's got to play where he's going to play. He should have his choice of it. And so I'd like to see them test him outside a little bit more. And for my own sake, I kind of hope he is good outside. I hope he proves some things are there that we haven't seen in his game, because he'd be a phenomenal fit for a team and a really good wide receiver. And if he's different enough from Christian Kirk by the end of this year, he'd be a great pick for Jacksonville. I don't think that's going to be the case. And obviously, you've kind of invested in your guys right now with Gabe Davis, with Christian Kirk, who technically won't be guaranteed after this year, but I'm not looking to change anything about that. And then Brian Thomas Jr. being your pick just 3 weeks ago right now. So definitely not really a logical pick for Jacksonville, but a player I really love in this class. And getting to final notes on him, I'll read my summary. I wrote that Egbuka profiles as an impact slot receiver at the next level, but questions remain about his ability to play a Z wide receiver. So far, he has shown a potentially elite combination of speed and strength, which makes him a major threat after the catch. He creates good separation through his refined route running ability, which makes him a quarterback's best friend. However, Egbuka took a major hit in production last year, and while this can be explained through the plethora of poor targets he received on film, he must improve to remain an early selection in the 2025 NFL Draft. Once again, my pro comp for him is Christian Kirk. I feel very comfortable with that. He is a late first-round pick as of now, and for the film that I reviewed, I did only go off of 2023 film, although I will, of course, admit I've watched 2022 film as well. He's been on my radar for quite a while. But the games I watched for this evaluation were Notre Dame, Minnesota, and Youngstown State. So that's our evaluation. We got 9 players here. It's our first class that we're going through for the 2025 NFL Draft. Next class will probably be edge rushers. That's my plan right now. I'm currently working through offensive tackles, so the edge rushers are finished. I can make that and I can upload it soon, but I want to, at least remind myself of my thoughts on each player so I can give you some good content there. But that's probably the order we're going to go through things. We'll go through most positions. I don't think we'll hit quarterback or maybe linebacker because this is a Jaguars channel. And, sorry to anyone who's watching this that maybe isn't a Jaguars fan, but I also don't really feel like I'm a great evaluator of quarterbacks or linebackers at this point. So it's probably best not to hit those positions anyway. But we're going to have quite a few of these, probably 7 or 8 of them over the course of the summer. So you guys can get to know the 2025 NFL draft class. This will be here, even way down the road if you start looking at it, maybe towards the end of the season or after the Jaguars season's over, whenever that is. But it's out here, and for people who love the draft, and I think we've got a lot of them on this channel, hopefully you can enjoy this and get to know some of these prospects early. But let me know some of your favorite players in the 2025 NFL draft. We'll have a video eventually this offseason, hoping to have someone on to talk about our favorite prospects for this next class. There's some guys I really like already. You heard a couple here already, but I think there's some fun to this class. So that's all I've got. I appreciate y'all joining. Appreciate y'all watching. I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. And that's it. So finally, go Jags.